of the model are coming from, and then I'll just eventually go to various conclusions based on this model about how culture and market may interact in generating growth and development. It's a work with my PhD student Priyanka Arora, who has already received her PhD. But this is basically, I thought I'll present this because we are in the process of finalizing the paper for submission now. So what is culture? I suppose I have to first define culture, because culture means so many different things to different people. So the way we are looking at culture, and this is a very specific way of looking at culture, not necessarily everybody would agree with it, but this is right now the most sort of prevalent definition of culture, which is that culture basically represents preferences, values, and beliefs that are at least partially learned, and they do not have any direct economic value. So in this sense, culture is different from skills. And the difference comes from that second point, that skills also are could be partially learned, but skills have a direct economic implication. Culture, culture or whatever the values and beliefs are all sort of work through preferences. So there may be some economic implication in an indirect fashion. For example, I might be inclined to learn classical singing. I have a preference. I love classical singing. But then if I become a classical singer and professional classical singer, then there is an indirect economic implication. But my first cultural preferences work through my love for singing, not necessarily its economic valuation. So defining culture in this slightly narrow way, this is not, we are not the first set of people to talk about the relationship between culture and growth. In fact, historically there is a long history of how people talking about how culture may influence growth, starting from Max Weber. If you some of you might remember that he was talking about how Protestant ethics might have developed a certain kind of work ethics among the in the pre-industrial revolution England, which eventually led to the industrial revolution and so on. So this has been there's a history to this particular topic. It's just that there has been a recent interest in the mainstream literature trying to look at the link between culture and development. So it started with this seminal paper by Avner Grieve, where he was trying to look at how cultural institution over time persist and they have an implication for growth. So that was Grife's paper in the terms of the two sets of traders in 16th century Italy. But since Grife's paper, lots of work has been happening in this field. I've given you some references here, but this is by no means exhaustive. And I have given you two references for those who are interested, which are which basically gives you excellent surveys of what have happened till now in mainstream economics literature on this particular topic. And as you can see, in mainstream, it has come back only relatively recently. So lots of papers are around 2008, 9, 10, and even currently. So our paper is basically talks to this set of literature, not necessarily the older literature. The older literature was sort of in some sense deeper because the culture was more broadly defined there. But we are going to look at a culture in a very specific sense about a particular type which evolves over time through a certain process. All right, so the recent mainstream literature has kind of highlighted various mechanisms through which culture may impact growth. So some of these are work at the aggregate level. For example, culture may induce various kind of social norms and promote institution which may be favorable to growth. It could be law and governance, it could be democracy or democratic institutions and so on. So that's one mechanism through which culture can impact growth. There are other papers which look at individual, how culture can influence individual behavior by fostering habits and preferences that are growth promoting. For example, certain papers talk about how culture influences your risk appetite, and that may lead to either technology adoption or undertaking entrepreneurship, which may be risky and so on. It also talks about how culture may gives a special status to education, and that may promote human capital formation. So our paper falls in the latter category, in the sense that we are going to look at how, in our model, culture is going to work through the influence on the individual, their decision making process. But we are thinking about extending our structure where eventually, and I may have, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about that, about when culture interacts even in the context of our model, not only through influencing individual behavior, but also at the aggregate level. One branch of this paper can be extended to look at an aggregative issue related to culture, or dominant cultural trait. So, but our take on this, the main take that basically we want to talk about in this paper, is the fact that culture is not something which is, culture takes a long time probably to change, but it does change. And also culture does not operate in vacuum. It always interacts with changing economic condition. It responds to changing economic condition. So in other words, what we are going to highlight in this paper is this two-way interlinkage between culture and growth. On the one hand, as other people have pointed out, cultural practices do influence economic development and growth. On the other hand, as we are going to argue, that economic growth itself may have an impact on the prevalent cultural traits and so on, so that there is a sort of circular flow from culture to economic growth and development, and then again back from economic development and growth to culture. So what we are going to do in this particular model is basically we want to capture this, this particular two-way linkage between culture and development, or culture and economic growth, in a dynamic general equilibrium macro model. And then we are going to, because there is a two-way feedback mechanism, eventually we want to see what happens in the long run, in the steady state, if you like, when this process of mutual feedback mechanism eventually, in a limiting sense, comes to a rest point, and what does that rest point look like. That is the objective of the paper. And the novelty of the paper comes from the fact that the earlier works looked at just the influence of culture and going to growth. We want to look at a mutual interaction between culture and growth. Now, before I go to the, I'll discuss a little bit about the model, although the model is not very complicated, but there will be some notations and so on. So before I go there, I just thought that I'll tell you a little bit about how the model works, in the sense that exactly what is the mechanism through which we are going to explore this link between culture and market. Well, imagine that at any point of time, the world is characterized by various heterogeneous cultural practices. And imagine at the same time, there exists a diversity of occupations. So you have at any point of time a set of cultural beliefs, or whatever traits, if you like, and a set of various occupations. Now, these cultural beliefs, which are at this point given to the, current population, have these cultural traits. Where do they come from? Well, they come from a cultural transmission mechanism which operates across generation. So the set of people sitting here in current time period have acquired their cultural traits from the socialization, that their costly socialization process, which their parents sort of invested in their childhood in the previous period. And I'm going to later argue that that costly socialization process depends on the prevalent economic condition. How? I'm going to make clear in the next slide. Now, given that there are certain set of people with a, already developed cultural values, which were determined by the socialization process of their parents. Now, what are these cultural values going to do in the economic front? Well, it's going to make you predisposed towards certain kind of occupations. For example, if my parents somehow inculcated in me that teaching is a noble profession, so to speak, then it makes me predisposed towards opting for an occupation of teaching. So in that sense, it makes me sort of, my preferences becomes inclined towards a particular set of occupation. However, the story is not so straightforward, because any particular occupation also has an income aspect to it. So when it comes to, I might be predisposed towards teaching profession, but imagine that if the teaching profession really pay me peanuts, I mean, I can't even probably, I can't even make my ends meet, then despite my strong preferences or inclination towards teaching profession, I may not opt for it. So in that sense, my actual choice of occupation is determined by both my inherited cultural values as well as the market wage rate. They interact to determine my ultimate choice of occupation. Now, once I determine my occupation, and all of us determine our occupation, is there a question, Zakir?
Yeah, I'm just clarifying. So
Yeah.
if I want to go for an occupation, I can get it.
Yes. So there is no, so in our model, deliberately, we have left out any kind of barriers to choice of occupation. It's almost like otherwise it's a free world. So nothing, there is no baggage towards that you carry forward in terms of either your, less wealth or any kind of other thing. It's only the thing that kind constrained or, influence your choice of occupation is this cultural trait. So that's deliberate because there are many models which basically say that you may or may not opt for a particular occupation even if you want to because of credit constraint, because of other barriers to those, entering those occupations. We are not going to look at those. We are kind of, pushing that they do exist in real world, but in some sense we are going to look at an abstract world. Well, they are not important, but even then the point is, does culture can still influence growth through when there is no imperfection at that level, at the market level. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, yes, sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, all right. Okay, so then given this setup, then we are going to see then occupational choice, whether I become a teacher or a professor or a scientist or a trader or whatever, all these occupational choices eventually determine the occupational pattern in the economy, which determines the growth rate. And as this determined growth basically means that in the next period the economic conditions are going to change, and if in the next period the economic conditions are going to change, that means that the socialization process, which depends on the current economic condition, is going to throw up a different set of values for my next generation, and the whole story will get then repeat itself. So that is the sort of a dynamic structure where culture and market are interacting. I start at this point with a certain set of cultural traits for the adult population and a certain set of occupation. Eventually, the market condition and the traits determine the occupational structure, which determines the future growth rate, the growth rate of the economy. In the next period, I have another set of people who have carried forward a certain cultural trait, depending on the socialization process, and they basically carry forward this exercise, except that the cultural trait might be different from today and the occupational returns might be different from today. Okay, so we then want to see how over time what happens, what is the ultimate rest point for this dynamic process. Now, as it must have been clear to you by now that this process, which I'm going to eventually model through a sort of, standard sort of equations and so on, the production functions, basically this link between, so the culture and market sort of, comes face to face, therefore, in our model at two points. So one intersection points between cultural market or cultural values or market comes exactly as when I said in terms of choice of your occupation. So I may be predisposed towards a certain occupation, but when I'm actually choosing my occupation, I'm also looking at the market wage rate. So that's one area where culture and market interact. The second area where the culture and market interact is, as I said, when I'm trying to socialize my children. Now, how do I socialize my children? I'm going to make the socialization process very, very precise later. But when I socialize my children, basically the idea is that I'm spending time. I'm spending time with my children to inculcate my values in them. But what is the cost of time? The cost of time is nothing but my market wages foregone. So in that sense, this is another point in which my cultural values or the cultural values of my future generation comes face to face with the market conditions as determined by the current market wage rate. So these are the 2 points in our model where culture and market interacts to influence, or culture interacts with market, and these are going to have some implications for the future growth process as well as future evolution of the cultural traits. So in this sense, we are going to look at the interplay between the two institutions, culture and market. Now, what are the research questions that we are looking at in this framework? Well, the first research question that we are looking at is that if this is how culture is defined, and remember, we are looking at, yes, is there a question again? I couldn't hear it properly. Is there a question?
No, I don't think it was a question.
Okay, all right.
Just
Fine.
unmute, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I can't see anybody, so it's difficult for me to decide. Fine. So basically, then the question is that if this is how culture is defined as a trait, and those traits or distribution of those traits evolve over time, and then there's also through that evolution of the trait or cultural trait, there is also economic activities happening, growth happening, and so on. So in the long run, when you are looking at the very long run, when this process plays itself up again and again, this interactive process, then what happens in the long run? Does culture remain important for growth in the long run, in the steady state, or does it cease to matter at all? Also, is it the case that different economies which are starting with different composition of these different cultural traits, some of us may love music, some of us may love science, and so on, so different economies may have initially different distribution of this different cultural traits. What happens in the long run? Is it the case that this initial distribution has any long-term steady state effect, or is it the case that this initial distribution eventually doesn't matter, irrespective of the cultural traits? Eventually the growth and the development process, because remember there is a two-way interaction process, eventually the initial culture doesn't matter at all. Eventually in the long run, all of us growth wise or economic activity wise start looking the same. Is that the case, or is it the case that culture may have a long run influence, in the sense that there is a culture induced trap which persists even in the long run? So that is our primary research question, if you like, that what happens at the very long run in steady state. But we are also interested in certain features about that long run steady state, not necessarily in terms of whether, influence of culture on growth, whether that persists or not, but also does that this kind of two-way interactive mechanism, remember culture to market and then again market to culture, give rise to convergence. Now, convergence can happen here through two ways. One is this process, interactive process, leads to cultural convergence, in the sense that is it the case that in the long run, all the cultural traits, eventually there's complete assimilation of cultural traits. All of us cease to look different. All of us become either A type or B type or whatever. So that is one possibility. The other possibility of convergence is economic convergence. Is it the case that through this interactive process again, eventually maybe all of us look different, but all of us economically cease to look different? All of us either have, joining similar occupation, or at least even if you're joining different occupation, income-wise, we start looking the same. So basically does this interactive process give rise to income convergence? So these are the two secondary questions that also, we are interested in the sense that whether there is convergence either in terms of cultural traits or in terms of the economic feature, which is the long run wage rate or the income. So these are sort of the basic questions that we want to explore in the context of the macro model that I'm going to show you in a moment. All right, so these are, I'm going to, this is, I'm sort of, I'm an applied theorist, so my way of exploring issues are always in terms of a sort of a broad model. So bear with me when I'm trying to put in the structure of the model in very simple terms, but please feel free to stop me whenever you feel that things are not quite clear. So the way we are looking at an economy at any point of time is an economy at any point of time consists of two sets of agents. One set of adult agent and another set of children. The children don't play much of a role here at this point of time, but when they grow up to become adult in the next period, then in some sense their economic decisions begin to make they take their economic decisions which begin to have an impact on the economy as a whole. So at any point of time, therefore, the adult agents are taking all their economic decisions and the young agents are sitting there. What are they doing as young? They're simply assimilating certain cultural traits, either through a direct action by their parents or somehow picking it up randomly from the parental generation. That's all that they're doing. So as a young agent, my child is simply picking up a cultural trait directly through me or from my generation. In the next generation, that cultural trait is already determined, inculcated when he becomes an adult, and that determines his occupational choice along with the market returns. and then that generates a certain economic occupation structure for the economy, which generates the market wage rates for the economy, and that determines his sort of income and his future how much time he wants to spend with his children, etc., etc. All his economic choices show up in the next period. Now, to fix, I can have many different types of occupation, but to fix ideas, I thought that to keep things simple, let's think about just two possible occupations. I have deliberately kept them very neutral. So one is scientist, one is managers. These are very elite occupations. You can bring in other occupation, you can bring it agriculture, industry. It really, for our purpose, the occupations are almost symmetric. So we were deliberately again avoiding layers in the occupational structure. We want to make them exactly symmetric. So both these occupation in our story, which is a make-believe world, they contribute exactly equivalently to the current output. So in some sense, it's as if the two occupations are exactly symmetric as far as current aggregate production is concerned. However, one of these occupations contribute also to future productivity. Now, for whatever reason, we have decided that it's the scientists who are augmenting the knowledge base. So they do augment current output, but they also are augmenting the knowledge base, which future scientists can, utilize, and therefore they're contributing indirectly to future productivity. And this is just for simplification. This is not to undermine the influence of managers to the future growth process, but we are assuming that the managers do not make this kind of contribution to future productivity. Now remember, the scientists are basically engaged in the production process, and if they're contributing to the future knowledge base, that's going to appear only in future. So today, when I'm going engage in a lab and coming up with a sort of a vaccine for the virus, there is a direct impact which I'm probably getting a return from, but there's also a future impact for the coming generation, for which there is no way that I can get a return. So this future benefit goes on. There is no direct monetary compensation that I can get, because that's going to happen in future. So it's an externality which is going from today to tomorrow as far as one occupation is concerned. Now, yes, is there a question again?
Yes, ma'am. Actually,
Yes.
what
Yes.
you have
Oh,
told in the last slide, that for
Yes.
the job of the scientist, he is
Yeah.
contributing to the economy in such a manner that his contribution will also be regarded in the future, but for that he is not getting paid. Okay, and
Yes.
according to the cultural norms, we are taking it for granted, right? Now, ma'am,
Yes.
I'm telling you an example. I'm just asking, ma'am. Ma'am, just take an example of a farm. Okay, any farm where there is a owner and there are the laborers. Okay, ma'am, the
Yes.
laborers are working, and ma'am, from the taking of the raw materials until the production of the finished product, the value what is being added to the product is being done by the laborers and also other employees. It includes the engineers and managers as well. But ma'am, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, the surplus value which is being added, only a part of that is being paid to these employees as the salary, and the profit, which varies actually. The profit is being taken by the owner. So, ma'am, can we also consider it as a effect of the culture that this form of exploitation is taken as granted? Or
I
we
can,
make the
yes,
selection of
certainly.
scientists?
Yes, I can certainly do that. And that basically, as I said, that, the way we are looking at the production structure is very mainstream and neoclassical. So what
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
talking about is that the culture may have an influence in the production structure itself to make it unjust, to make
Yeah,
it
ma'am.
inefficient in that sense.
Yeah,
Right. So
ma'am.
that's what you're, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So as I said, that those are the way we are looking at culture is influencing not the aggregate scenario, but only individual choices. That, as I admittedly, is a very narrow way of looking at culture. But my defense would be that once I understand these individual traits, allowing for the best possible market scenario otherwise, then I can further extend this to think about cultures which makes the market process itself inefficient, and that really is going to probably be a deeper contribution. But in some sense, to the extent culture influences both individual choices as well as the production structure itself, right now I'm going to focus on the first part, which is admittedly very narrow.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. but eventually we want to talk about other processes where the aggregate production process, or modes of production gets influenced, but I want to come back to that discussion later. And
Yovita
if
has
I
that question.
Yes,
There are two other
yes,
questions.
yes, yes,
Yovita, did you please?
Yes. It's a very clarificatory question, Moishumidi.
yes,
So, how the choice of occupation is
yeah.
related to the choice of economic growth in your model? I mean, you are relating the choice of occupation to culture. So, in other
I'll
words, are
come
you
back. Can
saying?
I? Yeah.
Oh,
Can I just come back to that question later? Because I'm just going to tell you
sure,
exactly
sure.
how I'm going to do that. Okay. What was your other question though?
No, my
Don't we
other
have
question was
patents?
No.
that my other question was, as you are relating culture with the choice of occupation, so think about a low economic growth country. So are you necessarily saying that that their culture does not put value on high-end jobs, that's why their economic growth are low? I mean, are you going to say something like this?
No, I'm
Are
not
you
going to say
relating this?
anything. No, I'm not going to say anything like that. All that I'm trying to say, I will say, I haven't said that yet. I will say is that initial distribution of what people do, and some people are motivated to do something, some people are not, might have a longer influence. Exactly, that's going to influence your preferences and so on. Exactly how that's going to influence economic growth is something that I want to come to later. Right now I'm just trying to see whether how the production condition is, and then how those production condition determines the wage rate, and then looking at that wages and given my cultural predisposition, what occupation do I choose. And it's right now it's completely a preference side story.
Okay,
Now there was
thank
a okay,
you.
so there was a question about the market structure, and the market structure being such that some people are sort of profits goes to only a certain set of people, other people get exploited, so to speak. This is the production side story, which is by choice, completely neoclassical. Now if it's completely neoclassical, what does it mean? It basically means that market is quote unquote just. So market, because of perfect competition, assume perfect competition, the market wage rates are just in the sense that every agent basically receives his or her marginal product. So this is a kind of story where the market really, the production process by assumption is a completely just process. So as if the production structure is completely delinked from the culture, which is, as I keep saying, is a very sort of drastic simplification. But as I said, I wanted to first look at the preference side story, then come to the production story, how culture can even influence the production structure. But that's basically comes as the next step. Okay, so this is also to clarify the question that was asked earlier. So you can immediately see that there is no exploitation here. Everybody's scientists and workers, scientists and managers, and or if you like capitalists and workers, are exactly symmetric. They all earn their marginal products. There is no excess profit that's being exploited. And in fact, just like as happens in a neoclassical growth story, the wages are determined by the marginal product in particular, because it's even the production function is a neoclassical production function. Eventually the wage ratio depends on the ratio of the two inputs, in this case managerial inputs and scientific inputs. Okay, so this is basically, we do not want to bring in culture in the production side story, in the sense that we should probably do that, but that's the next step that we are going to look at. At this point, production is completely independent of the cultural factors that are operating in the economy. There is no aggregative effect. But having said that, I want to draw your attention to the last bullet point that I have got here, which is where it's kind of different from solo. Because otherwise the production structure looks very much like a solo story. I mean, I've assumed alpha to be equal to half, but it really doesn't matter. You can have any alpha like between 0 and 1. This is just a neoclassical Cobb-Douglas solo type production function. So that's the aggregative production function. All the questions about how I aggregate inputs, etc., I'm just pushing them under the carpet. But what is important nevertheless, which makes it different from solo, is that this M, which is the managerial input, and this S, which is the aggregate scientific input, these are not historically determined. So if you remember, in solo, the capital and the labor were determined in the previous period. Previous period's investment, previous period's population, and population growth, etc. It's all historically determined. In our model, these are determined by the occupational choices of the agents themselves. So if culture walks into the production structure at all, it's going to walk into the production structure in terms of determining this particular ratio, which, as I'm going to show you, is going to determine by individual preferences, and those preferences are determined by the cultural traits. All right, so I'm just going to come back to that. So this slide is just a neoclassical story, but this M and S are not historically determined. They are going to be determined in the model through cultural preferences. Is it clear?
Yeah. There was one other question,
Yes.
Pranay Ghosh.
Yes.
Don't we have patents to ensure present monetary gain for the scientist?
No, we don't. Again, these are all deliberate assumptions. This is not to say that this is not realistic, because all why we want to say is that we don't want to give the scientist anything other than what they are getting as their current marginal product. So in some sense, they are contributing to the future, and that patent will give them a sort of a current patent will give them some extra beyond what they are currently producing, because that can come from future. We want to negate that. So we, in some sense, there's a market imperfection in the sense that they're contributing to future, but they're not giving paid. But the idea is that the current production pays them exactly in a just manner. Future productivity contribution, they're not there in the future. Remember, it's an overlapping generation, so the future is not going to compensate for that. So anything other than marginal productivity rule, we are deliberately keeping it out of the picture.
So basically, the scientist is someone who does it for the love of the thing.
Exactly, and that's where the culture bit comes in. Yeah. So that's exactly where it's not the returns either for profit or anything else. It's just the love of the things. All right. So here is exactly what Zakir said. So I can choose to become anything, scientist, manager. There is no barrier to me to opt for an occupation. There is no market barrier. There is no setup cost. It's not as if that I have to it's almost like I can train myself, instantaneously, either as a manager, or as a scientist. I don't have to pay fees for the IMMs and so on and so forth. So it's almost like, as I said, it's a perfectly competitive make-believe world in the production side story. There is no barrier to joining any occupation. Anybody is free to move from, being scientist to a manager, or the other way around. But so there is no market imperfection. It's a neoclassical make-believe world. But what you're going to carry with you is this cultural trait, your love for being a scientist, or your love for being a manager, or your love for being a teacher, which your parents had inculcated in you during your childhood. That's the only thing that when you come to the labor market to decide whether you want to be a scientist or a manager. That's the only thing that you carry with you. Nothing else comes in the way of opting for anything except for that cultural trait. Now, here is, now I'm saying that cultural traits, there are different occupations. Now, and
may I interrupt, please?
Yes,
I think there's another question. Shomodip Paul. Will you please unmute yourself and ask?
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, as you just said in the previous slide that managers don't get, they are not contributing to the future production.
They are contributing to the future production. But they don't get in the current that comes only in the future. Their current returns do not reflect that. It's just a marginal product that reflects that.
Okay, but if we consider that the cultural traits are being inherited in such a way that most of the professions are managerial and not scientist based, then what will be the coincidence?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Can you repeat that?
If we consider that the cultural traits are such that most of the people are choosing the profession of manager and not scientist, then what will be the
I'm going to, so basically what you're, to rephrase your question, what you're asking me is that suppose majority of the population in this, at this point of the economy actually prefers to be manager, right?
Yes,
And then
ma'am.
you want to know, yeah, I'm going to talk about that. So imagine different economies where the current population, some of them majority prefers to be manager, in some of them majority prefers to be scientist. These are preferences. How do I capture that? I'm going to come to that. Okay, so absolutely, I'm just going to talk about that. And the way I'm going to talk about that is by saying that I haven't talked about what are these cultural traits that I'm talking about. So I have talked about occupations. I've said that certain cultural traits makes you predisposed towards certain occupation. But what is this cultural trait? Cultural trait can be many different things. As Zakir was saying, my love to become a scientist. So I have just picked up a particular cultural trait just for as an example. It could be something as simple as my love to be a scientist, but it's just that we call that cultural trait something called public spirit. Why do I take it as public spirit? I call it public spirit simply because there is a long literature which talks about how public spirit and motivated agents who do not necessarily care for current returns to their job that they are doing often promote growth. So there is a long literature on quote unquote motivated agents. And who are these motivated agents? The motivated agents are typically those who have an interest in the benefit of the society beyond their own personal gains. So that's why I picked up this trait. And the motivated agent literature also talks about, and Moitish Ghatak, another alumni of the college, has a detailed work on this. What motivates motivated agents. So basically, there are certain type of occupations which basically has this kind of public spirit component attached to it. I've talked about scientists, but there can be teachers, doctors. They also talk about people working in the NGOs. Often the monetary gain is very little for that profession compared to other professions. And these are often, engineers or PhDs who have left some other very lucrative job to be engaged in NGOs or to come back to university teaching and so on. But what motivates them is not their current income, but that they are doing something good to the society. And in our sort of nomenclature, the occupation which has this particular public spirit component attached to it is the scientist profession. Again, as I said, this is just to fix ideas. It doesn't mean that managers do not contribute to future growth, but this is, or it's not public spirited. But just to differentiate between these two, we say that it's the occupation S which has this public spirit component. And therefore, if I'm a motivated agent, I have fairly strong inclination to join this particular occupation as opposed to the other one, which does not have this public spirit component. And this is the next slide is what tells us how cultural traits map into occupation. And this is somebody asked me about that. This slide is what is telling you how I map cultural traits to occupation. So imagine all of us, as somebody just asked me, imagine that all of us are carrying with us a certain cultural trait. My parents told me that be motivated, try to do good to the society, and I have been influenced by that, and I'm become type S. The other set of parents probably said that, look, it's basically ultimately it's the income that matters. Don't basically waste your time trying to think about the society. You just try to do what is best for you in terms of your own well-being, and then I probably become a market-oriented person. So these are the two cultural traits at this point of time, and it is quite possible that in any point of time different societies have different proportion of these two types. In some society there are many of motivated type. In some of the other society there are very few motivated types. That's quite possible, and we are going to see that implication eventually, that what happens if this type is different across society. In fact, types are different, distribution of types are going to be different across society, and we want to see what is the long-run implication of that. Now,
okay, sorry to interrupt, there's another question.
Yes.
Yeah, Richa, will you please ask?
Yes, sir. So, hello, ma'am. Ma'am,
Hi,
I wanted to
Richa.
ask you, is there a kind of trade-off that we are talking about between culture and market here?
I am going to talk about a certain kind of trade-off between culture and market, in the sense that it's a trade-off of getting some feel-good factor, utility, as opposed to foregoing some lucrative monetary income. So the trade-off is between some non-pecuniary benefits of being of a certain, but that trade-off applies only to one set of agents, not to the other set of agents.
Okay, ma'am. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Yes, there is a trade-off, but the trade-off is, the benefits for the motivated agents are all utility or non-pecuniary, whereas the cost is a monetary cost, because you are basically foregoing an income in order to work in an NGO or in order to join as the university, as opposed to going to a sort of well-paid corporate job or something. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Got it.
Okay. All right. Now, so as I said, so now we have two occupations. You can become a scientist or a manager, and they have their wage rates, which I have already defined, market determined wage rates. So that is one consideration that you look at when you decide whether to become a scientist or not. But in addition to that, as I said, the motivated types, the society-oriented types, also get an extra benefit if they can attach themselves to an occupation which has this public spirit component. And remember, in our model, the public spirit component is attached with scientists. That's by construction. But any occupation which gives them that kind of feel-good factor, that gives them something extra. So that also may tilt their choice towards that occupation over and above the market wages, which are purely economic consideration. And that's exactly the story that I'm going to look at. So two types of agents. One set of agents only look at the market returns associated with the two occupation. Other set of agents look at the market return as well as the feel-good factor associated with some of these occupations, and then determine their occupational choice. Here is exactly how I model this feel-good factor. So this feel-good factor basically says that when I join an occupation which has this public spirit component, then I get a sort of a, I almost glorify the wage rate or the return, market return that so it amplifies the market return in some sense. I almost feel that, oh, it's paying me only 1,000 rupees per month, but in my mind, I have a feel-good factor that looks at that 1,000 rupees as 10,000 rupees. So I I sort of amplify the market valuation by a number, and that number is a sort of a given number, but Q, which is greater than N. So if I'm a motivated agent, then in some sense, when I look at a particular occupation which is public spirited, I think that, okay, I'm getting a low income, but you know what? That income is worth to me 10,000 rupees, even though the monetary value is only 1,000 rupees. So in deciding in my occupation between this, scientist or be a corporate, I say that, look, being associated with, a manager gives me only the wages. Yes, the wage might be 20,000, but that's only the wage. Whereas when I become a scientist, yes, I'm getting maybe much lower. I'm getting maybe 1,000 rupees, but to me, that is equivalent to 10,000 rupees. So when I decide whether to join as a, manager or a scientist, I'm going to look at the market wage rate for the managerial profession and my feel-good valuation of the scientist wages, which is Q time ST. And this feel-good factor operates only for the motivated type, only for those who have a love to be a scientist. The other type are more, if you like, a more sort of rational neoclassical agents. They just look at the two market wages, and whichever gives them higher return, they decide. They don't have any specific love to provide public service or anything like that. For that matter, they don't have any particular inclination to any profession. Whichever profession gives them higher pecuniary returns, they are going to willing to go for that. So these are the mapping from types to the occupation. Am I clear? Because this is important. This is going to play a crucial role in the subsequent occupational structure. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Zakir, how much time do I have? When do I stop?
Mani, take your time.
No, about 20 minutes.
Half an hour. Yeah, half an hour. Yeah,
half an hour.
I think half an hour.
Yeah, half an hour is fine. Okay, fine. All right. So, so far for your trait, which you have inherited from your parental action, and how that maps into your occupation choice. And remember, you have two occupations. So when you're looking at those occupations, if you are a society type, then you are evaluating the market return of manager vis-a-vis Q times the market or inflated value of the market return of scientist. And when you're the M type, the market-oriented type, you're just looking at those market returns exactly the way they are. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story where I said market also, cultural transmission process itself comes and plays a role. I haven't said anything at all about how cultural values gets transmitted. How do I acquire my cultural value? How have I become either an S type or an M type or a society type or a market type in the first place? So let me tell you the story there, and then after that, I'll just quickly go through the model conclusions. But let me develop the story here also with some care. So here is the cultural transmission process, which I have picked up from a well-known paper by Visin and Verdier. But here is the story. The story is that when I'm as a parent, I have a desire to make my children's cultural values aligned to my own values. So remember, when I'm a parent, I'm already an adult agent, and I've already, have a set values which I had picked up during my childhood. But when I'm an adult agent, I'm already either I care for the society or I don't care so much for the society. I'm completely a market type. Now, given my trait, I now want my child to become like me. So this is a pure egocentric reason. I don't want my child to be like me because he's going to earn more income, but I just purely through ego, if I'm a S type, I want my child also to care for the society. If I'm a market type, then I want my child also to pay attention to the market, not care about all this rubbish about what is happening to the society, rubbish, quote unquote. Okay, so basically fairness and so on are basically a luxury. I don't want in my view, and I don't want my child to think about those. So every parent want their children to be like them, their type. Now a child is born naive. He is neither the motivated type nor a market type. So what the parents do is that they try to influence the child's type by spending time with them. So, and this is a sort of a reasonable process which Visin and Verdier sort of formalized. This is what we all do, I suppose, in our real life. We try to tell our children, look, this is good, this is bad, and so on. In the process, how do we do that? We spend time with them, and then we sort of, show them either, through examples or talk to them or read stories to them and so on. And then in that process, by spending time with them, we try to influence their cultural traits so that it gets aligned to my own set of values and beliefs. So the way to formalize that is, here is the formalization. Again, don't get too daunted by the notations, but this is actually very simple. Imagine that I'm a parent and I have a unit of 1 unit of time endowment. So part of that time endowment I can spend with my child. But remember, I have only 1 unit of time endowment. When I'm spending time with my child, I'm actually foregoing the possible earning possibilities. I could have gone and worked in the office. Instead of that, I'm sitting at home reading stories to my child. So basically, therefore, tau is my total time out of my total time endowment, how much time I'm spending with my child in order to inculcate my values into him. The rest of the time goes into the labor market. Whatever is your occupation, the rest of the time I work in that occupation in the labor market. But when I spend tau amount of time in my child, it's not certain that my child is going to surely pick up my trait. So it's just a probability. So it's probability tau, my child, after I spend so much time, after I spend out of 24 hours, 10 hours with my child, then 10 divided by 24 is the probability that my child will pick up the trait and he will retain the valuation that I'm trying to, sort of ingrain in him through this my action. Suppose the child does not pick up my trait. Suppose my social life, because remember it's a probability. What happens if my social life, despite my best effort, my child does not pick up the trait that I wanted to inculcate in him? Well, in that case, the child picks up some trait from the adult population randomly. So if I'm not able to give my trait to him successfully, then he is also interacting not just with me, but my friends, but with his school teachers, with other parents of his friends and so on. So there is a whole gamut of adult population with different kind of types out there. So he goes and interacts with them and he picks up one of those traits randomly from the generation of adult population, not necessarily me. So therefore, the generation of adult population, how many of them are society type, how many of them are market type becomes important. It becomes important because, as somebody said, that in different societies, maybe there are many people who are the society type. So when I, as a society type, fail to inculcate my values to my child still picks it up because he then goes and talks to his teacher, and his teacher is also the society type. On the other hand, in societies where there are very few of my type, then as I fail to inculcate my society type, my child goes and talks to his friend's father, and the friend's father, or all his friends' parents are probably market type, and in the process, maybe he's going to pick up the market type. He's not going to pick up my trait. So in other words, depending on the proportion of how many S type are there and how many M type are there, when the child is picking up randomly a trait from the random population outside, then with PT probability, he is going to pick up the trait of S. With 1 minus PT probability, he is going to pick up the trait of M. And that's the distribution of adult population in terms of trait. So to answer the question that was asked earlier, does the initial distribution matter? The initial distribution mattered through this proportion. Now let's put these two things together. So I'm a society type. What is the ultimate probability that my child will be my S type? Well, partly it's through my direct interaction, how much time I have spent with my child. That's what I call tau. If that fails, and that's going to fail with 1 minus tau probability, then he can still pick up the child from others in the society who are exactly like me, have exactly the same values, maybe his teachers and so on. So this is the total probability that my child will be, I'm an S type, and my child will be S type. The next one is exactly a similar probability, but now that probability has been calculated for the other type, the market type. The market type parents are also spending time to tell their children that, look, don't become too obsessed with this society, fairness, and so on. Just do, what is best income-wise, what is best for you, whatever maximizes your interest. So if I fail to inculcate that kind of thing, with some probability I'll be successful. But if as a market type I fail to do that, then he will still interact with other market type in the society. The children, the parents of my friend and so on, or his friends or my friends and others, and therefore that's the population of 1 minus P, so he's going to pick up that trait. So these are the two probabilities that are going to play an important role. So either I directly pick it up from my parents, or I pick it up from the people in the adult population who are like my parents. Now, so what do I do with this probability? Well, there are two things that happens with this probability. Now, as an adult agent, remember, I know all these things. Sorry, so I'm just moving ahead, I think. So I'm an adult agent. I'm spending time with my child, and then there's a probability that child will be my type. Obviously, if I'm spending time with my child, there must be some utility associated with that. So what is the utility function of an adult agent? The utility function of an adult agent, there are two components to that. One is consumption utility. So it's a standard consumption utility that, if I consume something, then that gives me utility. And, whatever is the sort of, happens with my children's, whether my children's becomes my type or not, that is in addition to that. This is the standard economic utility that we always talk about, my consumption utility. Now, consumption utility here is very straightforward. The consumption utility is that if I'm spending tau amount of time with my child, then the rest of the time I'm working. And if I'm working, there is no other outlet. I don't save. I don't do anything else. I just consume all my wage income. So this is just, is there a question again?
Yeah, Tamang, will you ask?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, like if my son, like if you assume I am a market type and my society is also market type.
Everybody?
Everybody's market type. But if
yes.
Can my son be a society type person?
If I'm the market type, and if everybody in the society is also the market type, yes, then just look at this. There is no so then there is no way that my child can become a society type, simply because there is so the only two things that if I'm the market type, then I'm going to spend time to make it a market type. So that's probability tau m. And if everybody in the society is the market type, then that basically means 1 minus PT is exactly equal to 1. And he's going to be a market type with probability 1. It's just going to be, yeah. So basically there's no way then he can become the other type. But the interesting thing happens if either I'm unsuccessful and he picks it up, so that the type, there are other types also in the economy. And then only it becomes interesting. Otherwise, it's basically the same type gets, every society, if everybody is the same, then the same population will get replicated, either society type or market type. The interesting thing happens when there are some market type and some society type. Okay, then only
Yes, ma'am.
then the dynamic process becomes interesting.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So when I'm deciding about how much time to spend, one is that if I spend time, remember I was saying there's an opportunity cost. If I spend time with my child, then my consumption goes down. That's the opportunity cost, because I'm not earning as much income, and that's my consumption utility goes down. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story of why I want to spend time with my child is that there is, of course, that's the cost, because if I spend time with my child, then my consumption would go down, I'll get less utility. That's the standard story of opportunity cost. But what is the benefit? The benefit is that there is an utility, direct utility. Remember, all of us want our child to be like us. So if my child becomes exactly like us, then I get a egoistic boost that, oh, I care for the society when my child cares for the society. Or I don't give a damn for the, fairness and so on. These are all rubbish. And my child also is like that. He doesn't want to go into all this, he doesn't want to go for protest and so on and so forth. And I'm very happy that he does not. So that gives me a utility boost, which we call V bar. That's the utility boost. So, but remember, that does not always happen. For that to happen, one, I have to spend time with my child, and secondly, his type also gets influenced by the society at large. So putting this thing together, this is my total expected utility. What am I determining? I'm basically determining the tau. That is my choice. I decide how much time to spend. When the time to spend influences the probability that the child will be my type. But there is also a cost. The cost is because as I spend time, my consumption goes down. So I'm going to determine optimally how much time to spend by maximizing this thing here. The solution is very straightforward. I will just straight away go to the diagram without showing you the algebra. So this is the, so basically, maybe I should show you the solution, because there are interesting things that comes out of this solution. So imagine that this is after I have chosen my occupation. So I have some wage rate. Now, what happens? So remember that if I have higher wages, then the opportunity cost of spending time with my child is high, because by not going to office, I'm losing so much income per unit of time. So therefore, if the occupation has a very high wage rate, then I am less inclined to spend time with my child. And therefore, the optimal time spent with my child is decreasing in the wage rate that I earn in the market. At the same time, as the solution shows, that optimal time that I spend with my child is decreasing in my own type in the population. Why is that? And the reason is very simple and straightforward. The reason goes back to this probability function. And it says that imagine that there are many people like me in the population. In that case, even if I am unsuccessful in inculcating my values to my child, even then he is going to pick up anyway from the population outside. If he is going to pick up from the population outside, then why would I spend so much time in inculcating my values when spending time is costly for me? In other words, what this function basically says, the solution basically says that if there are many people like me in the population, then I spend less time with my child in inculcating my values. I don't have to, because I know that my child will interact with his teacher and my friends and so on, and there are many like them, and he's going to be my type anyway. On the other hand, exactly for the same reason, if I have too much to sacrifice to make, if I try to inculcate my value, I'm a very high-flying lawyer, and I just, if I spend time, I'm just going to lose crores of rupees, then I don't want to spend so much time. Exactly the similar logic goes for the other type, except that remember that other type has the, population of that other type is given by 1 minus p. That's all. So these two diagrams basically tells you exactly when a S-type person will spend time and exactly in inculcating his values, and exactly when he's not going to spend time in inculcating his values to the child. So this is nothing but the frontier, the tau solution that I had plotted there. and equating equal to 0. So that's the frontier. Whenever the wage rate is for any given population distribution, if the wage is very high, then I'm not going to spend time with my child because it's too costly for me. Similarly, for any wage rate, any given wage rate, if the population of my type P is very high, I'm in this region, then I'm not going to spend time with my child because I know that my child is going to pick it up randomly from the population outside anyway. Likewise, for the other type. In case of other types, I'm measuring this from this axis. This is where, you know, the population type is 1 minus PT, remember, but exactly the same logic. And this is the first result, which basically says that now I'm just putting these two together, which is basically saying that whenever there are, you know, so whenever the wages are such that this, given the wages, if the wages of this occupation are such that this is where I'm measuring the wages of the two occupation, and the horizontal axis is the population type, and this is the interaction between population type and the market wages. So whenever the wages are low, or in any profession, either in the for the S profession or the M profession, then they are going to, you know, and so in some cases, in this case, they are going to spend time in inculcating their values because they have wages are low, they have enough, opportunity cost is not high, and their type is also low. Remember, PT is very low here, so the child is not going to pick up the trait from the randomly from the population anyway. So you think that you should have to spend time. Similarly here the other type, their wages are low, they have opportunity cost is not high. At the same time, their own type, which is 1 minus P, is also very low. So they know that their child is not going to, you know, get it from outside. So they think that they have to spend time. So in either case, in this case, the M type will spend time. So the population will going to shift for more towards the M type. In this case, the S type is going to spend time. So the population is going to shift more towards S type. Here, you know, both will, you know, spend time. So depending on the strength of how much time they are spending, population type will change in either direction. This is the region where population type is going to remain unchanged. So nobody spends time. So every economy will start with a distribution of maybe half of the S type, half of the M type, and randomly the same, you know, next generation will become again half of the S type, half of the N type. The next generation again will become half of F type, half of N type. The same population type will continue forever. It's only in this region, depending on the wages, they are going to be either S type or M type. Now, I just have about 10 more minutes, or 8 minutes actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the rest of the complicated story, and I'm just going to tell you how the dynamics and the growth comes about. Now, this is the how much time you spend with your children. Now, how much time you spend with the children determines your next generation distribution of type. Now, what about the occupation? I also talked about occupation. So I have said this is the wage rate and this is the other wage rate. So these wage rates, where do they come from? They also have to come from the, you know, my cultural traits, right? So where is that story now? Well, I'm just quickly going to show you that story. Let me skip the proposition and so on and so forth. This is the story. This is the story of occupation choice. Remember, how much time I spent is one part of the story. Other part of the story is what occupation am I choosing. What occupation am I choosing depends on, if I'm the S type, I'm going to compare these, my return or my perceived return from being a scientist vis-a-vis the wage rate from being a market. So basically, I'm going to look at this equation to determine my wages, to determine my occupation choice. And if I'm an M type, I'm just going to look at the straight away only the wages. And this equation is going to determine whether I'm going to be a market, going to be become a manager or a scientist. And remember, the market wages themselves are a function of these ratios. So in this general equilibrium story, therefore, this term Q comes in through, this is the cultural parameter, which is going to determine the distribution of the agents in terms of these two occupations, which in turn is going to influence the wage rate. So that's the other part of the story, and it's a bit complicated to take it back to the wage rate and find out who is joining what and so on. So I'm just going to skip all those slides, which just tells you how those the occupation mapping is done. What I want to show you is that eventually, what happens is that, again, I go back to the similar diagram where the horizontal axis measures the population type at any point of time. This is the case when the population type is low, of S type is low. This is the case when the population of S type is very high. And these are now telling me the market wages, because when the population type is of S type is very low, then remember it's a neoclassical production function. Then scientists, if all of them want to become scientists, even then the scientist wage rate is very high because the population is very low. Then the M type also want to join scientist profession because the wage rate is still very high, and therefore in the process, when the population is S type is very low, in the process the neoclassical mechanism of wage equality comes into play, and the two wages become equal. Both the S type and the M type, some of them all the S type become scientists, some of the M type also become scientists, and the wages are equalized. This happens when in the economy, the initial S population is very, very low. And remember, S population always wants to join the scientist profession. When the S population is relatively in the mid-range, what is going to happen is that there are many of the S type. And remember, they all want to become scientists. The moment they want to become scientists, the market wage rate by the neoclassical mechanism is going to fall. As the market wage rate begins to fall, the other type who want to look only at the market wage rate, they decide that no, there is no point going to become a scientist because I don't have any particular love to become a scientist. And at the same time, the wage rate is too low. So what happens in this region is that all the S type becomes scientist, and the M type think the wage rate is too low, and they become managers. And something similar happens here, but this is the case where all M types become managers, but some S type also become managers only because the wages is sort of basically too low, and then some of them decide that, well, even if I have a love to become a scientist, if the wage is too low, so some of them then switches over to the M sector. Okay, so this is the actual wage rate. So this is the actual wage rate influenced by the culture. Culture enters through Q. I've already shown you the cultural transmission mechanism, which interacts through that choice of tau. If I put them together, then I get the story of my mod. This is the story of my general equilibrium model. So what is this story telling us? The story is telling us the following. These are exactly the wage rate as a function of P that have different economies are starting with different distribution of population, and this is the corresponding wage rate for the managerial job and the scientist job. The red and the blue lines are, remember, my choice of the type. If I'm a type S, I decide whether to spend time with socializing my child or not. So the red and blue lines determine my socialization effort, and the orange and green line determines my actual wages. Remember that this is my socialization frontier if I'm the S type, and if my actual wage, in order to spend time with my child, my actual wage has to be, so if as long as my actual wage is below this red line, I want to spend time with my children because the opportunity cost is not too high. So whenever the actual wage is here is the S line, here is the scientist wages, and I'm going to spend time with my child. Or the S type, scientist type, is going to spend time with my child. They're not earning too much, and they feel that they should spend time, and therefore the population type is going to move here. Except for this region from 0 to P bar, at any other region, this is a particular position of the two curves, but at any other region, the way I have drawn it, notice that the S type, they're earning the scientist wages, and their earning is always above the frontier, which means they're not going to spend time at all with their children. What about the M type? The M type will spend time with their children if their earnings is below the blue line. It so happened that in this case, the earnings, as is defined by the green line, is always above that frontier, which means the N type in this particular diagram is never going to spend time in inculcating their their type to their children. They are too high fly to sort of spend time to their children to read them, whatever, to inculcate any values. So what happened therefore in the long run? What is going to happen in the long run is that this is where in the short run the population types keeps changing, more and more S agent comes in, ultimately until you hit P bar, then you stay there. At any other place, the P or the initial population's type remains constant because nobody is spending time in inculcating their values to the children. The children are simply picking up the values randomly from the adult population. So that's about cultural traits. So the cultural traits remain time invariant. It's just remain constant over time. No cultural assimilation. Nothing happens on the cultural front. What about the economic front? Things happen in the economic front because, as I said, remember, if your initial population is here, there is complete equality between the two sectors' income. This is where the neoclassical story plays out. There is the marginal wages are equal in the two sectors. No matter what your cultural type is, you are going to earn the same income. On the other hand, if you start in an economy where there are too many society types, then actually there is a difference between the society type, income of the society type on the market type. The society types are, their love for their work is basically means that the neoclassical society is going to is going to exploit them. They're going to willing to work in the S sector, contributing to the future productivity, but their current wage rate remains low. It remains low because whatever low income they're getting compensated by their love for the work. So in some sense, the society is exploiting the S sector here whenever there are too many agents who are the society type. So that is the story. That is the story of a sort of an exploitation through the cultural route, where the neoclassical wage equalization does not work simply because some people are culturally attuned to provide work even when their wage compensation is not high enough. Now, how does growth come in? Growth come in because remember the S type are also contributing to the future productivity. So over time, this AT, which is future product, which is the productivity, is probably going to go up. If that keeps going up, then these wage curves are going to shift up and up and up. So eventually, but these lines, red and blue lines, are independent of those, AT. So what is going to happen eventually is this line is going to shift up and up and up. Eventually, nobody is going to spend time in inculcating their values, not even the S type, but the basic result still remains the same. As long as the economy starts with a distribution of S type and M type, if there are many society type, then the economy is going to currently exploit the S type, offer them a low market wage, and in the process, they are going to get high productivity. So in some sense, as somebody was saying, that somebody was talking about capital and labor and how capitalists are exploiting the labor. Here, that exploitation is not a direct exploitation by the capitalists, but what is going to happen is that by fixing this cultural value, you are trying to tell people that you work and that's very good, it's good for you. And in the process, you are earning a pittance. But the point is you still feel good because you feel that you are doing great to the society, and the society benefits because over time growth is happening, but nevertheless at the cost of your own income, if not utility, your own income. So that is the story of, I'm not going to go into the other slides, that in nutshell is the story that we are going to sort of tell in this. And here the story is not of exploitation directly, but the exploitation sort of happens by this, propagation of cultural values, where you are, trying to, and that's used to what religious leaders, used to do earlier. So, they would tell you that, well, work, and then you are going to get the benefit in future. Don't think about your exploitation right now. This is something like that is happening through that term Q. Now, this brings the question, I'm going to stop in 2 minutes. This brings in the question that where is this Q come from? In our model, it comes as a parameter, but where is it anchored to? That's the trickier question. So we really want to look at what determines Q. In some sense, to our mind, the Q can also be a tool in the hand of the government, in the sense that the government can tell people that, look, you are an and some kind of nationalistic feeling can be inculcated in the soldiers, let us say, that I don't pay you enough, but the point is, you know what, you are working, you are defending the country. So I can, as a government, I can even manipulate that queue to inflate it up, and in the process what you are going to get is that these people are going to earn low income, but they're very happy. At the same time, the society is benefiting. So the society or the government may find a way to influence or to quote unquote exploit, not exactly exploit in a Marxian sense or in a traditional sense, but exploit so that everybody benefits in the society in future generation. But the income of these people remain low, but nonetheless they remain happy in this opium of, it could be religious happiness or motivated happiness, or the fact that you are doing something good for the society and so on. Whatever it is, that can be manipulated by the society, that can be manipulated by the government, and in the process you are generating inequality. Nonetheless, it becomes a stable situation simply because these poor people have been influenced already to compensate income by what is called utility. And that is something that can be potentially dangerous, but I'm going to just stop here.
I think Shomati Paul has a question.
Yes.
Shomati, will you please unmute yourself?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, suppose what happens in the long run is that a person is initially in the managerial, I mean, the market-driven profession. But what happens is that he earns so much wealth that he gets somehow motivated by the society-driven profession. And can that give rise to a new profession like economists? Because economists are the professions who are driven by both society and market.
Shomadip, that's interesting, because what you're saying is that these types itself, they themselves also may evolve economically. If I earn too much, then maybe at some point I was a market type, and then my beyond the if my income goes beyond a certain point, then suddenly I switch type. So that is possible. I haven't allowed for that, but that's certainly possible, because
maybe it can give rise to new professions like economists.
Not just profession, it has better a more deeper connotation, in the sense that many of the initial reform process in India and elsewhere, remember, progressive reform process were undertaken by the so-called quote unquote elite people. So in some sense, it's almost as if generations of wealth at some point of time make you society oriented. So I'm sure those generations of those wealth came from a market process. But once you become a Rockefeller, or once you become a Motilal Nehru, let's say, then it's easier, in some sense, then you decide that I'm no longer a market type, I'm going to inculcate society values. Those kind of switches are possible, are realistic, and I'm sure I think my model will get enriched if I incorporate that, and that's a very good suggestion. I will think about that. I don't know exactly how I'm going to frame that, but that certainly is an important question if I want to relate it to the history of how these cultural traits have been exploited, so to speak, to generate motivated agents. Yes,
sir.
Bhakti.
Sir, একটু unmute করবেন please.
Your story is straightforward.
শুনতে পাচ্ছি না স্যার।
হ্যাঁ,
There is echo.
কি হচ্ছে?
Your story is straightforward. You do not need any of that neoclassical model at all. It does not do anything. It merely continues the story.
আমি শুনতে পাচ্ছি না স্যার। আমি নিওক্লাসিক্যাল মডেল লাগবে না, কিন্তু এক্সাম্পলটা শুনতে পেলাম না, আপনি বলুন।
Example উদ্ভিদের মধ্যে
স্যার আপনাকে স্যার আপনাকে যদি ফোন করে নি,
হ্যাঁ সেটা বোধহয় বেটার না
হ্যাঁ
স্পিকার
হ্যাঁ।
ফোনে।
না, আপনাকে যদি আমি ফোন করে স্যার আপনাকে যদি আমি ফোন করে নি,
হ্যাঁ তাই করি।
আপনি আমাকে কোয়েশ্চেনটা বললেন, আমি ওকে রিলে
না না
করে
না
দিলাম।
না না বরং তুমি স্যার যদি
বা speaker phone এ, হ্যাঁ।
স্পিকার ফোনে বেটার হয়,
হ্যাঁ
কারণ আমি একটু শুনতে চাই।
হ্যাঁ।
জাকির,
হ্যাঁ এক মিনিট, আমি ফোনটা পেয়ে। স্যার আপনাকে আমি মিউট করে দিচ্ছি, দিয়ে আপনাকে আমি ফোন করছি।
ঠিক আছে।
জাকির স্পিকার ফোনে দিও, হ্যাঁ আমি প্রশ্নটা শুনতে চাই।
না, ফোনটা যাচ্ছে। ভ্যাকসিনেশন।
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ ফোনটা
হ্যাঁ পাচ্ছি। আবার শোনা যাচ্ছে না জাকির। জাকির তুমি শুনতে পাচ্ছ?
প্রফেসর বাগচি দুটো ডিভাইস থেকে লগ ইন করে আছেন, একটা অফ করলে ইকোটা অফ হয়ে যাবে।
জাকির তুমি বলবে একটু, আমি ভালো শুনতে পেলাম না। জাকির তুমি একটু রিপিট করবে? আমি যেটা শুনতে পেলাম সেটা হচ্ছে নিওক্লাসিক্যাল মডেলের দরকার নেই, কিন্তু তারপরের পার্টটা আমি শুনতে পেলাম না। তুমি একটু বলবে জাকির, তাহলে আমি রেসপন্ড করব।
হ্যাঁ কি বলছো?
তুমি কি আমি প্রফেসর বাগচির কথাটা শুধু নিওক্লাসিক্যাল মডেলটা দরকার নেই সেটা বুঝতে পারলাম, কিন্তু অল্টারনেটিভ যেটা উনি বলছিলেন আমি ভালো শুনতে পারলাম না, ইকো হচ্ছিল। তুমি কি শুনেছো? তুমি একটু রিপিট করবে? কারণ আবার ইকো হচ্ছিল।
হ্যাঁ
আমি শুধু
আমার মনে
প্রফেসর বাগচি আমি কেন নিওক্লাসিক্যাল আমি লাস্ট পার্টটা বুঝতে পারলাম না আপনার সাজেশনটা, কারণ আমি শুনতে পেলাম না। আমি জাস্ট আপনাকে বলি যে কেন নিওক্লাসিক্যাল মডেলটা আমি আনতে ইন্টারেস্টেড ছিলাম। আপনি একটা অফ করে দিন প্রফেসর বাগচি, দুটোতে লগ ইন আছেন, একটা বন্ধ করে দিন। হ্যাঁ একদম পারফেক্ট।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ এবার এবার
Now-
আপনি আনমিউট করুন।
হ্যাঁ।
আপনি আনমিউট করলে এবার শুনতে পাবো। ওই তলায় গিয়ে
ওখানে
তলায়-
বোধহয় স্পিকার নেই।
ও তাই জন্যই প্রবলেম হচ্ছে নাকি? না
হ্যাঁ,
তলায় গিয়ে
একটাতে স্পিকার আছে, একটাতে নেই।
না তাহলে তো ইকো হওয়ার কথা না এই রে, তাহলে তো আমি
হ্যাঁ।
শুনতেই পাবো না।
ছেড়ে দে, আমার যেটা মনে হয় যে স্যার যদি একটা মানে পরে একটা ইমেল
আমি
করতে
আমি
পারেন।
আপনাকে ইমেল করব, আমি আপনাকে ইমেল করব। আমি জাস্ট চট করে বলি কেন আমি নিওক্লাসিক্যাল গল্পটা এনেছি, তার কারণ নিওক্লাসিক্যালে ইউজুয়ালি এক্সপ্লয়টেশনের গল্প থাকে না, বাট এখানে এক্সপ্লয়টেশনটা ইজ নট মার্কেট এক্সপ্লয়টেশন, ইন সাম সেন্স থ্রু দ্য ইউটিলিটি প্রেফারেন্সেস। সো আই ওয়ান্টেড টু হাইলাইট দ্যাট যে মার্কেট অ্যাজ ইফ অ্যাপারেন্টলি মার্কেট ইজ ফেয়ার, বাট ইভেন দেন দেয়ার ইজ সাম কাইন্ড অফ এক্সপ্লয়টেশন। বাট আমি আপনার পুরো এক্সপ্লেনেশনটা শুনতে পেলাম না, আমি আপনাকে ইমেল করব, আপনার ফিডব্যাকের জন্য। বাকিটা তো শুনতে পেলাম না,
হ্যাঁ
কি করব জাকির?
ঠিক আছে, so it seems that the neoclassicals are taking a hand in this.
Well, the
Anyway.
idea is, yeah.
হ্যাঁ
বলো,
বলো বলো।
you had a question.
No, I didn't have a
related to-
question. I was just
No,
saying
so
that
No, so the idea was that I think basically why I want, there was a neoclassical model because the story of exploitation goes, really is playing up in terms of occupation choice, which is culture driven. But the idea was that that's exactly the point, that sometimes you may say that, well, the market is basically paying a fair wage, so to speak. So, sometimes I can say that where is the exploitation? But then the exploitation can be in terms of rigging people's preferences. And I think we do see a lot of that happening around us. So therefore, I wanted to bring in that story in the context of a quote unquote fair market, to say that this kind of process can still go on, if not through the market, then in terms of influencing people's preferences, which I thought was a story that the neoclassicals do not talk about. For them, preferences are always given. So I thought that, but the moment you make it interact with this kind of things, then even in a neoclassical market setups, this kind of at some level exploitation. When I say exploitation, remember it's just the income, and these people are actually happy. So if you take the neoclassical notion, then even here there is no exploitation because they're all happy. They're earning low income, so what? They might be starving, so what? They're happy. So in that sense, but to if you think about wage inequality, it's starkly there in an equilibrium situation, which is an otherwise a neoclassical equilibrium situation, which is what I wanted to highlight. But I think Professor Bakchi will have some other points. I think I'm going to write to him.
yes. Okay, so I'll open the floor to discussion. We had already had a lot of interaction, but if there are still some other questions, some clarifications, comments. I'm just asking a question.
Yeah.
And it's completely off the route, but what you're having is some sort of it's cultural transmission, evolution of culture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how does it compare with, let us say, the competition between genes?
Yes. So that's where I think the Q factor that I have, it's kind of there's no evolutionary story here. So that's why I said that where is this Q come from? Who this cultural sort of predisposition towards valuation of a certain occupation or whatever it is. So that is sort of hanging there in some sense, and that's the weakness of the model, in the sense that plays a very crucial role, but we don't anchor it to anything else. We are just saying that this is the society determines it, right? So who is the society? And then, as I said, sometimes the interpretation could be also the government propagates this kind of values and so on. The evolutionary story will say that any Q has to be anchored in some sense in terms of the benefit that it gives to the future generation and so on and so forth. So gene is something that, I'm genetically predisposed towards a certain occupation is probably even further away from this culture story. So in some sense, but then genetic things can, or evolutionary things can come in the sense that I might, those Q can be my evolutionary traits that develop over time because I'm happy about something and so on. But I personally didn't want to go there, simply because I find sometimes the evolutionary story is slightly, should I say, slightly too kind of too close to a very, very right-wing views about the world, too close to that kind of setup where the gene determines ultimate economic conditions, which I find slightly uncomfortable. But I mean, somebody might say, an evolutionary economist might say that, but that Q is exactly rooted to the fact that people feel happy, and therefore that gene gets, or the preference gets propagated over time because they are feeling happy after all, even though they're not earning much income, by the way. So one can bring in an evolutionary story. I didn't want to go there simply because I'm not very comfortable with those kind of evolutionary stories at all. Where biological traits interact with your economic condition kind of thing. That's what you have in mind.
Yes. By the way, there's another question by Shankar Mitra. He's from IIT Delhi, one of our old students.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for the presentation. It was very insightful. I just have one question. So, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the parents, they play a part in forming your cultural values, and the occupational choice is determined by wages and the Q factor, right? Like that exogenous factor Q. So my idea is that often this wage or the Q factor, that can also have an impact on my cultural values, right? Like, for, let's say I'm a son of a scientist, and I see that, okay, the occupation of scientist is very much celebrated by the media and the government. So in a way, my culture is getting influenced by that Q and W directly, right? Instead of my parents imparting the cultural values on me.
Yes. That's easy to address, because what you're trying to say is that my transmission mechanism doesn't necessarily have to be vertical coming from my parents. It can be horizontal also. I see things around me and I get influenced, right? And that I can easily accommodate. So I just have to extend my cultural transmission process, not just so with some probability I get it from my parents, with some probability I get it from my parental generation, and with some probability I look around me. And then that, so I just have to augment that. But the basic conclusions will, so basically whether the preference formation comes through a horizontal process or a vertical process or a combination of both, that I can accommodate, and results are not going to change much. But that's the important point. I didn't talk about that, but in a way to simplify things, I just thought about a vertical process of preference transmission. But it can be very well peer effect or a contemporaneous effect. And that's possible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah?
Yes,
So
ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions? No, I think we had a lot of interaction already during your talk. So I think we can, I think we can wind up.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you, everyone. So it was wonderful talking to you. I wish I had sort of, I think I went too fast towards the end, but I had sort of explain the last part a little bit with more time, because that's really in some sense the crucial part of the story. But anyway, so I think in developing the story I spent a lot of time, but as long as you can always write to me and then I'll respond to you if you have any further comments, questions. Zakir has my email. But thank you very much for attending. And Professor Bagchi, I'm going to write to you, send you an email right away. Thank you, Moushumi. Thank you, Zakir, for inviting me.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, see you sometime soon physically.
Yeah,
Excuse me, ma'am.
we hope so.
Yes,
We
yes.
hope so.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can I somehow know what Professor Bagchi was going to ask?
I'm sorry, not now.
So he has
Yeah,
to
we
send me an
couldn't
email.
hear.
Yeah.
Yes,
We couldn't
All right.
hear.
there's a sound problem, so
Okay. Thank you. Bye. I'm going to. Bye.
yeah. Oh,
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
yeah. So I'm closing the call meeting.
Would you please stop recording, Zakir?
Yes.